Now I'd like to add another networking feature to our drawing program. We've already added the ability to send pictures back and forth using simple sockets. This one is going to be more complex, and it's going to, for that reason, we're going to use RMI for it. The goal is to illustrate the usage of RMI. Now this one actually has a bit more of a graphical aspect to it, so I went ahead and I wrote the GUI code, at least a startup for the GUI code, because the reality is we don't need to see this. Okay, this is not a video on GUIs. You can go out to the GitHub repository and look at this, but I want to talk about exactly what this is going to do. We need the analysis and then some design before we can actually write the code, and then we'll run through some of the early steps of the RMI in this video before we go on to make the full implementation later. So I've hard-coded this right now so that if you do the collaborate menu and you say join collaboration, it pops up a window that looks like this. This is basically the GUI that I want to have for our collaboration sketching. And you'll see here there's some radio buttons, a freeform, a line, a rectangle, and ellipse. And freeform I can click and just draw stuff. Lines will be straight lines. Rectangles, ellipses are fairly self-explanatory. The difference is we're going to have it so that multiple people can have different drawings in here. They're all overlaid so that you can kind of collaborate with one another. And then we also have chatting down here. The clear button will clear your drawing, but not clear anyone else's. So, if I were to draw two ellipses over here and then someone else, sketch something, and I hit clear, my ellipses would disappear, but all of their drawing would still be there. And so, we don't want to have it so there can be like this combative thing where people delete each other's stuff. You can't touch the other person's stuff, and you could draw over the top of it so that you wouldn't see it. That's not, but you can't alter what they're seeing on their screen. In the book, I've added onto this the ability to also share drawings through this. We're not going to add that detail in here. So, how are we going to implement this? Well, I said earlier, we're going to use RMI, and we need to have both a client and a server. This collaborator is going to be the client. So that GUI that I just pulled up is going to wind up being our client code. I also need to have a server, and I'm going to create a new file for that. So the class itself will be called the collaboration server. And we're going to have a remote trait that we will call the remote collaboration server. Now it turns out the server in this is going to be remarkably simple. All that it's going to do is keep track of who all is attached to the server, so that when someone new connects, they can tell them who all is there. And then all the rest of the work is going to be done peer-to-peer. Remember, that's one of the advantages of RMI, is that things can be done in a peer-to-peer way. Okay, so the method that I want here is just to join the collaboration, and when someone does this, they have to tell us who they are. So they're going to pass in a remote collaborator, which will be an error for a little while because we don't have we don't have that written yet. And what this is going to return to us is a sequence of remote collaborator. Okay, so that's one of our remote interfaces. Back in collaborator here, we can add the other one. So we will make a remote, and we will call this one, as we were just typing it, a remote collaborator. Oops, I need the keyword trait in here. Okay, and what goes inside of the remote collaborator? Well, the remote collaborator is going to have the ability, so this is things that people can call on this client to make it change things or do things. One thing is you should be able to chat to them. So we'll have a chat method which takes the text that has been sent and it should show up in the GUI. I would also like to have the ability for other clients to ask about the sketch that we have. And so we're going to have a request sketch that returns a sequence of, and this will be an error for a little while because we haven't created these yet. So I have this drawable type for the main drawing. To differentiate it, we're going to call this a sketchable type. So we saw that we had freeform, the lines, the rectangles, and the ellipses. Those are going to be our different types of sketchables, and you'll see they have a very different interface than the drawables because this really isn't intended to be kind of the same type of application where you can see the view tree and edit the individual elements. You can put them in and you can clear them. But you can also send them back and forth. And so by making this type called sketchable, we're going to make it easier for us to communicate our sketches. So we should be able to tell this collaborator that someone else has updated their sketch. So we need to know who is updating their sketch, and that will be another remote collaborator. And then we need to know what their sketch is, and that will be a sequence of sketchable, much like the one that we just talked about could be requested from this client. Okay, that's it for now. Once again, the advantage of RMI is that, or one of the big advantages of RMI is that we could come back later and very easily add new methods to this, and then we would add them into the implementation. I would like to make this happy, so I'm going to go ahead and create a trait called sketchable. And that should be enough to make this happy. Now we need to, so we've basically done step one for RMI, which is we've made the remote interfaces. Now I'll start doing step two, which is to make the implementations of those interfaces, and they also have to extend unicast remote object with our remote collaboration server here, and in the collaborator this is going to extend unicast remote object with remote collaborator. Okay, now of course these are unhappy because they don't yet have these methods. The server is going to be fairly easy to implement here. We just need to have the ability to store the remote collaborators so that we can return them. So we're going to make a private val that is the collaborators, and it will be a mutable dot buffer of remote collaborator. Okay, so we'll start off with an empty buffer, and we need to add an import for mutable. Okay, so we have our collaborators here. When someone joins, we need to add them to our collaborators, and then we need to give back a sequence of collaborators. Well, that's just collaborators. And there we go. That's the server. Okay, so in this case, the full implementation was pretty easy. Now note that this server code right here isn't doing some of the RMI stuff. We will work on that kind of back in the drawing main. On the client, we have these three methods. And so I'm going to add their implementations down here at the bottom. You can see I've put some methods in here that we haven't written. Most of these I had left a to-do on. There are actually quite a few places where I have to-dos. You can see these are things that required more than just the GUI. So they dealt with either the RMI or the sketching or things that I wanted us to actually do in videos. So I'll put some to-dos in here, and then we will go ahead and stop this particular video. This has gotten us largely through. Oh, this one, let's put 3 question marks so it will compile. So everything compiles. This has gotten us largely through the second step. Of course, we haven't fully implemented these things. They're still waiting to be done. But we have our remote interfaces, and we have the implementations of them that also extend unicast remote object. The code for binding and looking up, as well as starting the RMI server, is actually going to go inside of our drawing main. We have, from before, we had this join item. I added just enough code to pop up that window that we saw at the beginning, but we're going to need to do some stuff in here to make it so that this winds up handling a lot of these steps 3, 4, and 5 of the behavior for RMI. So we'll stop here and we'll come back and we'll work more on getting implementations in place so that we can do things in the next video.